Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. My name is Ellie Andrews, and I'm the UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor for Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties. And I'm excited to welcome Raymond today to talk about peaches. And we're going to hear from David and Steve later as well, two growers, one commercial and one hobbyist, who have plenty of experience with peaches as well. So welcome everyone. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Raymond.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so as Ellie explained, my name is Raymond Mireles. I'm the fruit and almond advisor for Fresno and Tulare counties, so located in the South San Joaquin Valley. Happy to be here and happy to talk about peaches. Just a little bit of a background about myself. I was born and raised in Visalia, so in Tulare County. I went to Fresno State for my bachelor's as well as my master's there. Did a master's thesis in almonds using drones to detect spider mite damage. So a little bit of IT, plant science, and entomology there. I started this position back in October of 2023, so going on 3 years now. And as part of my assignment, assigned crops, I have mainly the prunus species, so almonds, peaches, nectarines, plums, prunes, cherries, apricots, and then also we do have some considerable acreage of blueberries, pomegranates, kiwi, and persimmons. So that's just a little bit of background about myself, and sort of where my focus is at. But um, but yeah, as I mentioned, the prunus species is one of the main species I work with here within these counties. We do have a lot of acreage kind of split between Tulare and Fresno County, in the Kingsburg area, Kingsburg, Parlier, Dinuba area. But ultimately, within the prunus species, we have your peach, nectarine, plum, cherry, apricot, and even almond as well. Quite typically, what kind of separates this from the other crops or even the other fruit out that we have out there is, of course, that big stone that it has, the fleshy mesocarp, and as well as the skin or the exocarp there. Flowers are fairly showy as well with those five petals. As there we have our almond here and your peach and nectarine there. So get into, peach tree growth and development. So peach tree, just like the prunus, any other prunus species, it is a deciduous tree. So ultimately, right now we're seeing the trees in a dormant state here in dormancy. As it reaches a chill requirement things start to warm up, we're going to see the flowers come through first, then eventually starting to sprout out with its leaves. That's when we start to see our fruit development is through the spring into the summer. Once we harvest and pick it, we've now entered the post-harvest here where we have a fruitless tree, and then eventually the leaves will start to fall off again, start to reserve some of those carbohydrates, and then ultimately we start the whole process over again. Um, in terms of its fruit and flower growth development, kind of just keeping this kind of wide perspective here. Um, Starting kind of what would look like at the end, but really this is sort of the beginning. Flowered bud formation actually happens a year before. Bud differentiation and initiation and differentiation occur late in spring through fall. And then ultimately, as the leaves will start to fall off the tree, those carbohydrates will be pulled from those leaves, going to be stored into those to the woody tissues, but as well as the roots as well. Um, Ultimately, what this um, ends up being is that as the plant is in dormancy, it will start acquiring chill hours. So ultimately, that's 40 uh, hours at or below 45 degrees. And once the tree has reached adequate amounts of chill, it is then going to be accumulating heat units, in which that's essentially what's going to cause bloom. But ultimately, what the importance is of chill hours is that ultimately, if we get adequate chill for these trees, you'll have uniform bud break and synchronized bloom. And on the opposite side of that, if we had inadequate chill, it can cause weak or abnormal flowers, delay or prolonged bloom, which potentially could lead to more disease or just more susceptibility to environmental conditions such as frost. And then as well as just overall just a reduced fruit set there. As we moved from dormancy, and as I mentioned, as it starts to accumulate heat units and come out of dormancy, the bloom timing really varies between cultivar or variety, the wintertime temperatures, orchard location, as well as your microclimate. So, cultivar, but ultimately your weather is really determining when these trees wake up and start to bloom. At this time, even once it blooms, it is environmentally sensitive to frost, rain, high winds, and heat spikes. So all can ultimately um, uh, kind of prohibit a good crop there. So that's more just kind of like an overview of sort of what we're looking at throughout the season. In terms of the flowers, so peaches produce perfect flowers, both male and female organs. They're self-fertile, so they do not require cross pollination or something like you'll see in almonds where they need a pollinator. Um, quite technically, bees or pollinators are not required, but it will improve pollination efficiency and potentially can get you a better crop there. So that's a little bit on the flower growth and development. When we start to look at, your actual peach that we're going for our fruit growth, it follows this double sigmoid curve. I'm not too sure if you guys seen this before, but ultimately we have three phases here: your cell division, pit hardening, and cell expansion. And so ultimately in that first stage, we have fruit growth is fairly rapid and is dominated by cell division and early cell expansion. So ultimately, these cells are just multiplying within these fruitlets. They have highly dependent on carbohydrate availability. That's coming from essentially what the tree was reserving from last season, from the roots and as well as the woody tissue. Tree water status at this time and temperature are both determining factors, and stress at this time can ultimately determine your size of the fruit that you will have throughout the season. We sort of hit this lag phase in stage two. So this is the pit hardening phase. The external fruit grows slowly, but the endocarp or the pit starts to lignify and it really focuses the energy on seed development there. Once we enter into the third phase, growth is mainly driven by cell expansion at this point. So really, at this point, it's just accumulation of water. And so it's really important to keep these trees irrigated at this time, as really it helps you grow the fruit, essentially get your size. This is when sugar is also being followed into the fruit as well. So what you get your color development. So getting some nice light into the canopy is very important. And really just your flavor and aroma compounds start to come into play there. So that's just more or less um, the idea of sort of what we're looking at in terms of fruit development. So in terms of stone fruit varieties, there are quite a few out there. If we were to talk a while ago, there may be only a few, and maybe there's only one dominating variety. But now, especially working here in the UC for about 3 years now, I'm coming to understand that there's quite a few different varieties out there, and really it's up to a grower's preference. And really, we do have some big growers out here that are technically developing their own type of cultivars and varieties, so it's hard to keep track of. But ultimately, kind of pointing out here, we have our main stone fruit here. Um, as I said, the prunus species, but then also we have a lot of things sort of in between, so a lot of hybrids as well. But ultimately, to try to keep simple and the way that I like to explain it, you can sort of separate, the varieties of stone fruit and even just peaches to your early, mid-season, and late as well. And ultimately, what growers are looking for is good yielding and easy care, and of course, matching all the fruit qualities as well, flavorful, large size, bright color, and even some uniqueness to potentially tap into some of the niche markets that they have out there. But ultimately, if we're thinking about um, the up north, potentially you guys are more prone to frost, maybe some weather, some of those conditions in the spring. So potentially choosing a mid-season to late season variety would be best to kind of hopefully avoid some of those environmental conditions that could be damaging to the crop. In terms of rootstocks, your primary focus there is, I'm thinking, of course, up in your guys' area, maybe tolerance to heavier soils and maybe even tolerance to some soil-borne diseases as well, just because of how much water potentially you guys get up there. You also want to think about their overall tree vigor as well. A lot of the practices that are conducted in stone fruit are still done by hand. So having a really large tree out there is really not the best thing, especially if you want to get up on a ladder and have to prune or have to thin or do things as such. And then this thing about the environmental conditions again, cooler springs. So this is just a small table. I have a little bit more of an expansive table just talking about some of the rootstocks. And as I mentioned, I'll be happy to share this slideshow with you so that way you guys can go into a little bit more depth. But ultimately, this is just here just to get a better perspective of the potential rootstocks. Here down in the southern San Joaquin Valley, the Nemegard rootstock has done really well for us for a lot of our stone fruit. It does well in the sandy soils that we have out here. And so from my perspective, that's mainly the one that has been the dominating rootstock at least. Getting into a little bit of site selection and planning. Here's some 10 things to consider, especially when considering to plant, your peach orchard or even a peach tree. Of course, think about your climate, chill accumulation. As I mentioned, it's important for these trees to acquire the right amount of chill in order to wake up. Ultimately, with some of the peach varieties that we have out there, there's some low chill varieties that are out there that even for us down here that don't have as cold of winters are still adequate to make it through. Want to think about frost risk and your cold air drainage as well. Think about potentially not putting these trees where we have a lot of frost risk at. Your soil drainage or root depth, of course, is very important. Peaches are very sensitive to waterlogged soils. So the sandy soils that we have around here is fairly ideal for peaches. And if you're looking to plant some of these peaches up in your area, look for a minimum of 4 to 6 feet effective rooting depth. So that way those trees can really spread out. Soil chemistry, of course, comes into play. Looking for about a pH of 6 to 7. Um, all, you know, Good idea to test the soil, see what your soil fertility is looking like, as well as if there's any salinity there. Orchard history. So if there's already been an orchard planted there and you're ripping it out and planting some more peaches, you also want to consider the replant risk, potentially of the native microbes that are in there already or the nematodes there. Just to look out for that. Down here in the southern San Joaquin Valley, we don't get much rain, and we're having some issues with groundwater as well. So water availability and water quality is something to really consider. Understand where you're going to be getting your water from in order to supply the trees with its optimal ET. Sun exposure, so good sunlight improves flower bud formation, fruit size, color, and sugar accumulation. So sun is very important for just the overall tree health and as well as your crop. Wind and air movement, especially if you get some pretty wet springs, your disease pressure will increase, and so ultimately, open up that canopy would be a lot better. Also, want to consider if you're in a really windy area, it could cause some issues for your crop as well, fruit rubbing and shoot breakage. Topography and just orchard layout, just thinking about your spacing out there. Maximize light interception and as well as a more air movement that you have out there. It's kind of hard to tell just depending on where this land is coming from, your pest and disease pressure that's been there before. If you're coming in and planting right behind another orchard, potentially you have an idea of what pests and diseases were there before. But if it's something that you're planning into new, it's sort of something that you would have to go out there and monitor for and just get a good lay of the land and understand potentially what are the pests and diseases to be concerned of. So these are just some considerations uh, uh, in terms of site selection and planning. So this slide gives you a good idea, essentially of what, not just for peaches, but just for stone fruit altogether in terms of management. Typically, you have your winter pruning followed by your flower thinning or your fruit thinning. depending on the cultivar and your rootstock, you potentially have some summer pruning as well, and then ultimately it kind of just repeats itself. Crop protection kind of depending on the pest and disease that you're kind of going for, um, uh, more or less lasts all season, and then as well as just consideration of applying fertilizers if needed and when needed. But ultimately it gives you an idea of when these activities are taking place. In terms of pruning, your primary objectives for pruning is to maintain an open center, open vase canopy, maximize light penetration to fruit wood. As I mentioned, it's not just important for the tree to intercept that light, but also for your fruit. You want to have a good balance between vegetative growth and fruiting. Reduce disease pressure by improving air movement throughout the canopy. Support uniform fruit size and quality, and then annual renewal pruning is essential. It's not optional. These trees do require it just to mainly remove and open up that canopy. So why do peaches require annual pruning? Peaches uh, produce fruit on 1 year old wood, and so ultimately some of that old wood that's out there can be pruned out and open up that canopy. So unpruned trees become shaded, shift fruiting to exterior of the canopy, really start to see the tree start to reach out into the middle of the rows, and then ultimately produce smaller and poor fruit quality. And so, quite typically, the system that we see out here, there's a lot of different growers are experimenting with different densities of the orchards and as well as different pruning styles. But quite typically, what we see is an open center. So they're choosing of 3 to 4 main scaffolds, and kind of like how you see on this picture on the right here of sort of that those 3 to 4 main scaffolds there. In terms of what you're looking for in removing removing pruning out wood, there is upright vigorous shoots in the center, shaded weak wood or old or non-productive wood, and you want to retain well-positioned wood and outward growing 1 year old shoots as well. A little bit more about pruning. So, as you guys saw on that diagram there, so dormant pruning in the late winter is fairly standard, helps improve light structure, sets crop framework. Especially with the crop dropping its leaves, you're able to see, a lot of those branches and be able to kind of work with it. Delayed pruning is also an advantage, it actually work out well for you, especially if you're in frost-prone sites. If you do get a lot of late spring rains as well, potentially holding off that pruning until the rains have passed, potentially, going out there and pruning and having some rain follow up will help with the spread of disease and just infection. Summer pruning, it is something that is practiced. It helps improves light and as well as airflow, helps manage excessive vigor, especially trees that are really kind of getting out of hand. But also has some risks to go with it as well. So use cautiously to avoid sunburn on the tree itself, but also some of the fruit. As I said, open canopies dry faster after rain and reduce, diseases such as brown rot and as well as canker pressure. Um, you want to avoid pruning during wet conditions, active rainfall events, and sanitize tools when disease pressure is high. In terms of peach thinning, so thinning is to me it's fairly interesting. It's your way of sort of manipulating the crop into giving you a bigger and a better quality crop. So thinning reduces crop load, affects the competition for assimilates among fruit. Higher photosynthate availability induced by thinning leads to metabolite changes in young fruit developing that can prime further development processes, leading to better fruit development. Ultimately, you're just accumulating more weight for each fruit, assuring that each fruit is getting the maximum amount of carbohydrates. So fruit from thin trees uh, being larger and of better quality than those of unthinned ones. So to kind of explain this a little bit further, and sort of answer the question of when's the best time to thin. So it's a balance among different competing fruit is usually obtained by fruit or flower thinning. So earlier the better. So if we go back to our diagram regarding our fruit growth curve, as I mentioned in that first stage, we have our cell division, and so that's when the fruit itself is actually just cloning the cells and just ultimately making those making more of itself. Ultimately, this is the timing that we need to look out for when to thin. The earlier the better. And so ultimately, you're allowing the fruit to accumulate more cells within itself. And ultimately, if you have multiple fruitlets or even just flowers, all the carbohydrates are going to each and every fruit. However, if you were to have just only a few fruit there, as the carbohydrates will start to disperse, it'll actually just make these bigger fruits. So thinning is fairly important, but doing it earlier is actually better. Understandably, in terms of management, it's easier for a crew to go out there and see the fruitlets rather than seeing the flowers. And ultimately, if you're thinking about phosphorus as well, frost can also damage a lot of your flowers out there too, so it can maybe thin it itself. But also at the same time, if you're thinking about flower thinning, if you go out there flower thin and then experience a frost there, ultimately you can end up with no crop. So it's sort of a balance in kind of thinking about it situationally. But ultimately, earlier the better, to get the most size and really just the quality of your fruit. When we're thinking about sunburn and frost protection, really canopy management for sunburn, avoid over pruning, as I mentioned before, maintaining leaf coverage to shade fruit. Irrigation management is also very important. Just making these trees you don't get too stressed out, prevent water stress during heat waves, and keeping trees transpiring at peak temperatures. Especially down here, we do get fairly warm in July in the summertime, and so it's only prone for these trees to get stressed and it's hard to keep up with the demand of the tree. Of course, we have some clays that be able to spray onto the trees and help with some of this with some of the sun protection. But we also do use reflective ground covers, especially during the times where we're getting close to harvest and we want some of that fruit to kind of color up as well. Um, in terms of frost, it could occur, late winter, early spring. The highest risk you're looking at is full bloom and as well as petal fall. Damage could be worsened by cold and wet conditions. Frost risks are mainly driven by poor cold air drainage, and ultimately, if we think about when frosts are even around this time, the cold air likes to kind of flow like a river, especially when we have some of the heat up top, trapping it down to the orchard floor. So if you're kind of near the low end of the land, ultimately those are their most frost prone conditions there. Um, so yeah, so it's just some things to look out for, but potential tools to use in order to reduce the risk of sunburn and just up the knowledge on frost. So now I'll just be getting into irrigation and as well as nutrition. So of course, why does irrigation matter in peaches? Well, it directly affects fruit size, quality, and as well as tree health. Stress impacts this year's crop and next year's buds. So not just important to think about how is the trees looking during harvest or during the time that the fruit's developing, but it's very important to understand that it's also generating the fruit for next year. So in terms of critical timing here, especially in that first stage, of course the cells are dividing, and so you would need a lot, would need adequate water at that time. But typically we're coming out of the spring or around the springtime, so hopefully the orchard, the soil profile is still have some water there. It has a lower demand in that second, mainly because it's not growing as much. Um, but ultimately in that third stage, it has its highest demand, as I said, that starting to drive the water into the fruit. But uh, as the water is moving in, it's as well as bringing in sugars as well. So really the key practices is to maintain consistent soil moisture, match irrigation with ET. So ultimately, if it's hotter out there, the trees are using more water to cool itself down or even just to transpire. Want to consider your soil type and as well as your crop load. Ultimately, your soil type, how much water you'll be able to hold in the soil profile, your crop load, how much, really is demanding from the tree. And really, it's more or less a balance, right? So it's a science and an art to be able to avoid water stress and as well as water logging. But do the understanding of your soil types and just ultimately how much your trees using will help to kind of navigate that. You also want to think about your system efficiency here in the Kingsburg, Dinuba area. We still have some growers that are on flood irrigation. That's just what they're set up for. But it is possible to do some drip or micro sprinkler systems that are a little bit more efficient in delivering that water. So of course, water itself is very important, but in terms of nutrition, water is a vehicle that delivers nutrients to roots and ultimately, and ultimately to the plant. So diffusion, usually works very slow, but it does follow water. Well, diffusion is typically with the 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 nutrients moving from the soil particle into the roots, and mass flow is usually followed by water, and delivering these nutrients into the plant. So if we're thinking about stone fruit nutrition, some things to keep in mind that is a perennial system that stores nutrients. And so if we're going back to this diagram, taking an overview, so if we're looking at winter dormancy, um, ultimately, when we drop the leaves drops, the nutrients are being recycled back into the woody tissue and as well as the roots. And then as this tree starts to come out of dormancy, it's actually the remobilization of these carbohydrates and nutrients into the sink or into the flowers in order to get it there. And it's not until the plant has leaves on it where it starts to create photosynthate and start to produce food for itself. So ultimately, there's a storage there. So keeping care of your trees throughout the season is fairly important for them to wake up the next season. Um, Couple of things to consider that here is targeting fruit quality. We're targeting fruit quality here, not biomass. So we don't want to make a lot of growth for us. A lot of shade for us. So avoiding shade is key. So shaded leaves get less light, lower photosynthesis, and then fewer sugars produced. And ultimately, those are some things just to consider in terms of nutrition. Um, so when we talk about our essential nutrients, so ultimately what makes a nutrient an essential nutrient is a life cycle cannot be completed in their absence. So just a quick reminder of your macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and as well as our handful of micronutrients, and each play a critical role in the plant's viability. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depths here about this, but it is for you to read and digest. But ultimately, what I point out here is that a lot of these have a lot similar roles within the plant. A lot of them are within chlorophyll or even just making up of cell walls and things as such. Even a lot of your micronutrients have a lot to do with fruit set and as well as flowering and things as such. And so at times, especially when trying to diagnose your orchard of potentially the deficiency out there, a lot of these can look like each other, can coincide with each other. The best way to sort of identify um, where your orchard is lacking at is your tissue sampling. Tissue sampling tests are best used as a feedback for your nutrition program. So ultimately, going out and selecting leaves from your orchard and being able to test them. Um, if you are planting an orchard, it's always best to go out there and soil sample just to understand one, what you have within your soil, if there's any reserves there, if it's even necessary of applying, some of these nutrients out there potentially could be reserved in the soil. And as I mentioned, being kind of monitoring these nutrients would be beneficial, especially just in terms of the excessive growth that you want to avoid in the shade and things as such. Some other things that are important just in terms of nutrition, your soil texture, of course, is important. The makeup of your sand and clay. Ultimately, if you have sort of a heavier soil, your cation exchange capacity is increased. So if let's say if this is more of a clay soil, it'll be able to hold on to a lot of these nutrients a lot more than we say with their sandy soils. And so quite typically what we see around here in the southern San Joaquin Valley, a lot of the sandier soils have a difficult time of holding on to water, but also to nutrients. And so just identifying the soil type that you have will also allow you to understand, potentially if I had this soil amendment onto my crop, potentially where would it be at? How long do I irrigate? And how do I ultimately just deliver it to the tree? Additionally, your soil pH plays a role into this, as we see that some of these are need to be or need to be around that seven pH of 7 mark. There's also some that are more towards acidic side. But ultimately, through a soil test, you'll be able to sort of identify, when where your soil is, where your soil pH is at. In terms of, just the application, we like to follow the 4 R's or the trap. So time, resource, and amount in place. Ultimately, I'm just going to be swinging through each of these and just to give you a good understanding of sort of how to think about, when applying your fertilizer. So if we go back to that development curve where we're just thinking about the fruit, we are concerned about the tree, but ultimately we're not going for biomass. We're worried about what the peach requires. If we're looking at a stage one, your nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium are fairly important for early cell division, and ultimately just overall ATP transport and things as such. Your micronutrients such as boron and as well as zinc really help with flowering within the tree, and so those are important to have early on, heading into to fruit development. Stage two, again, it's sort of that lag phase. Still needs your nutrients there. Potassium, moderate uptakes, it helps with the manufacturing of photosynthates during that time. And then ultimately, to kind of back up essentially with that flow of water in that stage three, a lot of your potassium, helps accumulate the sugar loading fruit size and as well as soluble solids. But just to give you an idea of sort of when the fruit is actually needing some of these nutrients there. In terms of your resource, you just need to be mindful of ultimately, whatever fertilizers you're putting on has different leaching risk and as well as volatilization. So definitely have to consider, the type of soil that you have, the different qualities that make up your soil, and understanding which would be the best fertilizer to put on and to avoid some of these risks that you have out there. Again, just talking about the soil, there is different soil interactions with different types of soil fertilizers. With your sandier soils, as I mentioned, they'll be able to go through the soil profile a lot quickly, while we have other fertilizers that tend to hang out and to stay within the top few inches of the soil profile. So again, just understanding your soil texture will help you understand which would be the best resource to go with in terms of fertilizer. In terms of place, of course, you have a few options: your soil application, fertigation, and foliar sprays. Foliar sprays tend to help with a lot of those harder to accumulate nutrients within the soil, but just kind of have a good understanding that the plant is made to take up nutrients from the roots. And so ultimately, the foliar sprays will work and will help you get by, but ultimately taking it up by the roots to either do fertigation or soil application is quite best to accumulate the most amount of nutrients within the plant. So in terms of insect pest management, peach twig borer, oriented fruit moth, aphids, scale insects, and occasional stink bugs and earwigs are something to look out for. If we're thinking about in terms of just basic IPM, dormant pruning and sanitation is really going to take you a long way. As well as monitoring shoots, fruit, and going out there and potentially using some pheromone traps for your Lepidopteran species, but and as well as keeping track of the time of the season, and as well as the pest life cycles, and really just getting out there and checking out how things are, seeing if there's any obvious fruit damage or any obvious limb breakage or infestations. In terms of your organic tools, you have your dormant oils, your BTs for your insecticidal soaps out there, but really want to encourage beneficial insects to really help with, especially with your aphids out there. And really, this you want to avoid excessive nitrogen. So really, just maintaining the overall health of your tree will help you. will help you navigate throughout the season. Especially if you have a lot of that really weak and kind of succulent tissue with due to the excess of nitrogen, really just leaves a lot the door wide open for these insect pests to come right in. In terms of disease management, again, sanitation is something really you have to consider. Really want to bring up the disease triangle here. In order to not have disease, you would have to interrupt either one of these three of the disease triangle: your environment, pathogen, or host. And so, really being going out there and just preventing the disease from getting there is important. If we think about peach leaf curl, if you do experience that out there in the field, um, uh, potentially having a preventative sprayed, in the dormant season would be beneficial. If it does come about, ensuring that you're staying you're you're sanitizing your orchard by potentially destroying the leaves and inoculation throughout there. Same thing with some of your fruit rots out there. Leaving your fruit out there out the tree, especially if it's infected, could spread into your other fruit there. So staying as clean as possible is the best thing to do. So just wrapping up here, of course, I'm just barely touching on these topics, but the UCIPM does have a lot of great resources just in terms of pest management. If you guys have not heard already, Ellie told me that some of you guys are backyard growers, but also maybe some a little bit smaller. But the Home Orchard Second Edition just came out as well. It's a great resource. Goes in a lot more depth about sort of what I'm talking about here. Couple of online resources. So the California Fertilization Guidelines, Speech and Nectarine. That's a really uh, good one just to talk about the roles of your nutrients there and sort of how to manage it. With the fruit report, it was old. It's it's fairly old website put on by my predecessor, Kevin Day. Since our migration to a new format within the UC website, I can't find it, but as soon as I can, I'll be able to kind of reintroduce this stuff back into there. But it has great information just about overall horticultural information. And of course, the Fruit and Nut Research and Information Center, you can find a lot of resources there just about any fruiting crop there. I know I went through this fairly quickly, Ellie. I apologize if I was going through some of these fast, but wanted to give some fair time to some of our other speakers. But I'd like to thank you guys for listening here. Feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. I'm here as a resource as well. Of course, I'm not up in your guys' area. I have a little bit more perspective of what we experienced down here, but would be happy to entertain any questions or any comments.
Thank you so much, Raymond. That was excellent. I really appreciate the thorough overview. But yeah, you kept it under, 40 minutes. That's really, really great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we do have time for questions. So there was a lot of great questions in the chat. It was a lively chat. I tried to answer some of them as I could, but I obviously don't have nearly as much experience working with peaches. So I'm thinking maybe we could just start there and take maybe 5, 10 minutes for questions for Raymond before we move on. So before we jump in though, I do want to say the UC IPM website has tons and tons of information about all of these different insect pests and diseases and other types of pests as well. So when in doubt, I think it's great to just start at the UC IPM website, and I started kind of putting those links in at those comments for the different pests that came up. But I am going to go kind of scroll up and maybe we can start with, I know we had a nematode question. Um, Someone asked how to test for nematodes.
Yeah, so testing for nematodes is kind of similar to what you would test for so for soil fertility as well. Depending on how big of an area you're working with, you would like to sample randomly using a soil probe. Um, Ultimately, what I've done in the past before is either take a soil auger or soil probe, go to some of the different places throughout the orchard. If you have trees planted already, you can kind of aim for where the some of those roots are going to be at, either in the middle or kind of close to the base of the tree. Ultimately, you take a composite sample. So throw all of your soil cores into a bucket, mix it around a little bit, put it in a bag. And here in the Central Valley, we have Nematodes Inc. that we like to take it to in order to do some testing for us and to identify the species of nematodes that we have out there. We also have a Andreas Westphal down this way that I work with in terms of nematodes. But ultimately, that's sort of how you would do it. They would quite typically, if you would be able to take it to a lab to test it out and see different species, and they'll be able to give you the information in terms of thresholds of concern, at least in terms of your populations of nematodes.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, I'm just gonna scroll down through the chat until we get through all of them, and then if we have time, I can open it up and you can just ask them and unmute yourself. But the next one we have here is it generally accepted now to not winter prune because of eutype?
That's a good question. Like I said, it's hard for me to kind of say because down here we don't get nearly as wet. So we typically do our winter pruning. It's always best to avoid pruning if we're expecting a rain or even after a rain. So I know in apricots, eutypa is something that is of major concern. In terms of peaches, I'm really not just too familiar with it. Um, it just sort of depends. If you do experience, a lot of diseases during the winter time, summer pruning is an option. But like I said, winter pruning kind of holds its own advantages in terms of creating its framework, being able to see the scaffolds and understand, where the branches are at. But if it is in fear or if it is in concern to diseases, potentially holding off into a little bit warmer time may be beneficial.
Thanks. Okay, the next question is how to recognize fruiting wood so we keep that while pruning.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, a lot of the flowers and the fruiting buds come from 1 year old wood. So really kind of keeping track and going out there and doing your regular pruning will help you understand where some of those branches are at. So if you're really looking at a lot of excessive growth and you have a lot of big growth, you want to prune that out. And a lot of your lateral branches is sort of something that you want to keep because quite typically that's where you're going to see a lot of your fruiting wood at. So like I said, 1 year old wood is what you want to look for. So ultimately, like I said, if we're looking at the trees again, um, um, you know, the growth that you're going to get in throughout the season, throughout the summer, that is your 1 year old wood that ultimately is going to have fruit bearing for the next season. So if you go out and start to see, understand that you see the 2 year old wood or even older, maybe not as productive, you want to prune that out and just make way for some of those 1 year old shoots.
Nice. Okay, so maybe focusing more on finding that older wood that could be removed. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What are some examples of reflective ground covers you might use in high value blocks?
Yeah, so I think Steve can probably speak to this a little bit more, but my understanding is that, to me, it more or less looks like tarps, white tarps that are ran down the middles of them, just to help reflect um, a lot of that light into, so it can get up underneath and into the canopy. I really couldn't tell you the type of tarp it is or where to kind of find it at, but yeah, but maybe Steve can give some perspective to that.
Nice. Okay, yeah, maybe we'll bookmark that one and ask you that, Steve, in a little bit. We have so many questions in the chat. This is great. Maybe let's do like another couple minutes, and then I definitely want to make sure we have plenty of time for our other two speakers. I tried to answer some questions about sunburn protection. So really nice links at UCIPM website about whitewashing, kaolin clay, stuff like that. Peach leaf curl link. Yes, Laura asked about shot hole. Definitely also look at the UCIPM website for that too. Someone asked about a copy of the PowerPoint. I will be sending that out probably tomorrow or the next day. So everyone who registered for this event will have a copy of the PowerPoint. Um, some nice comments. Let's see. What is that list? Testing facilities. I do have that list. I will include that list of labs for California. I'll include that in the follow-up email as well. Um, let's see. Could you please tell us what this series is about? Grown in Marin. Okay, so the Grown in Marin, that is more of a website where you can go and see all kinds of different relevant things for Marin County specifically. So that's actually separate from this. This event, I'm hosting this event, and I'm the UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor for Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties. I'm actually based in Sonoma County, but I cover Marin as well. And so this event was kind of designed to try to answer lots of questions about peaches for the North Bay area specifically. But Grown in Marin was like one of the places this was advertised. I hope that makes sense. Okay, for the sake of time, maybe let's see. I think I got all of the questions. Oh, a couple more. Okay, last one. Where can I go to get my soil sample? That will also be in the link that I send you. There's quite a few different soil testing labs in California, so you've got some good options. Any last comments, Raymond? Thank you again so much. This was really great. I know I learned a lot, but yeah, any other things you'd like to share before we go to the next person?
Yeah, no. Please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. My email and that's my office phone number, but best way to reach me is through my email, and I'll be sure to get to your question if you guys have think of anything after this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, let's transition now to our two grower panelists. So, welcome, Steve and David. I think we're just going to start with Steve, and I'm going to go through some questions, and then we'll have a little bit of time for you guys to ask Steve questions too. And then we'll save, the last 15, 20-ish minutes for David as well. And I'm happy to stick around as well if we go a little over. It's okay with me. But I do want to be mindful of everyone else's time too. So welcome, Steve. I'm really excited to hear about your peach operation. And I was just wondering if maybe you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your orchard, where you're based, what scale you're at, and that kind of stuff.
Okay, I am a third generation organic stone fruit and raisin grape grower in Kings County. We, out of the 60 planted acres, 6 acres are peaches, about 16 and a half are pluots, 5 are peaches, nectarines, and 5 are plums as well. And then 20 acres of raisin grapes for sun-made raisin growers, all organic. Um, uh, Started growing in 1978. So I'm an old farmer in the neighborhood there. We primarily go wholesale with our stone fruit and raisin grapes. It's too much for me to do with farmers markets and all that stuff. Although I am looking at we're working on a food hub with a local resource conservation service, and we want to do locally sourced stone fruit. One variety of stone fruit is too small, and I want to get it into a school lunch program. But yeah, that's about it for the first question, huh?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, congratulations on the start of what sounds like a new food hub. That's very exciting. I feel like we need more of those everywhere, really. But where I was wondering where else do you sell? You mentioned farmers markets, and just generally who ends up eating the peaches and other fruit that you grow?
Oh, my stone fruit is I produce about 15 to 20,000 packages of stone fruit a year, and I sell to a wholesaler packer shipper, and he's one of about a half a dozen mega shippers. My one packer does 15 million packages compared to my 15,000, so I'm kind of a drop in the bucket compared to other people. Organic market is good for me. It's been worth uh, jumping through the extra hoops to be organic and now regenerative. We're starting a regenerative farming practice organization in the valley as well. So we're finding that we don't need to put a lot of the, especially nitrogen inputs that we used to do conventionally. We can somehow get it out of the ground or through our cover crop or our compost and do it naturally.
Nice. That's great to hear. Um, Another question I had was just sort of big picture wise, what motivated you to grow peaches in particular? Maybe are there certain benefits, advantages? Maybe they're your favorite fruit. I know that's true for David and myself. But yeah, what kind of made you think, yes, I want to grow peaches?
Well, for many years in stone fruit, we were just primarily plums and nectarines, and I love both of those. And I had some land that needed to be planted, and my packer shipper said, "Well, why don't you go with this variety called Diamond Princess Peach and put it on a Bright's hybrid rootstock?" And this particular peach can be sold for freezer peach, or you can sell it for fresh market as well. And it's been worked out quite well for the combination of the rootstock has enough push to get the fruit on the top to size and color and mature properly and carry a pretty good size crop, profitable anyway.
Nice. Okay, and this is actually a great segue. My next question is, what are your favorite rootstocks and scions and why?
Uh, you know, it, uh, I know Nemogard is primarily the biggest one. It's the one that you can put I think a peach plum or nectarine on and they'll all shoot off really well. Um, in some of my grounds where I'm organic, I'm not sure about it holding up to nematodes and other soil-borne diseases, as well as our global warming, our more intensive heat, longer summers, high stress areas. My other rootstocks are holding up much better. The Wright's hybrid and the oh gosh, the ones for my pluots are holding up much better. So uh, yeah,
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how things shift, the next 5, 10, 20 years.
right.
Ones perform well versus maybe not so much. And any favorite scions in particular, like peach varieties that you think are just really great, popular, good flavor, low
If,
maintenance?
yeah, if you're a home grower, I'm kind of old fashioned. I like the Alberta peach series. You can get them that'll ripen from June all the way till late July, just depending on the variety. That's the definition of a peach, kind of like a Santa Rosa is the definition of a plum. And they don't grow it commercially anymore because they're not feasible to do that. But yeah.
Nice, yeah. You mentioned that, you're organic, you're using compost and cover crops, and you actually are saying you don't have to put on as much nitrogen at maybe as before, which is great. Is there anything else you'd want to share about like soil, nutrient management, or irrigation even?
I hire an independent pest control advisor who does not have to sell chemicals to make a living. And honesty is the best policy. And uh, they have talked me, well, the first year I went organic with the raisin grapes in 2003, I brought a bug in called the vine mealybug, which is devastating for grapes. My neighbor said, "Well, you're a dead duck. You've got to go conventional and nuke them with Lorsban and all the organophosphates and stuff." And my PCA was a PhD in entomology. He said, "Just quit putting dusting sulfur on for mildew control." And he says it's very disruptive for predators. And since 2003, I've never had economic damage from my raisin grapes from buying mealybug. So I had natural predators that I wasn't killing off. Um, and uh, so where my neighbors are spending thousands of dollars an acre trying to control, I've had it naturally and never had to pay for it.
Wow, that must be really gratifying to see that, that change, that
Eh,
improvement.
Nature has a way of solving its own problems sometimes.
Yeah. What would you say are the biggest challenges you faced with peaches? Maybe it's pests, or something else, and what resources have been most helpful?
Yeah, it's, I think as far as pests go, uh, prophylactic care for especially peach curl leaf. We have San Jose scale, so you need to spray dormant oil, um, good oil application in the winter, as well as for the peaches and nectarines, I put on a copper formulation for the peach coral leaf, and you'll have minimal or very almost no problems at all with when you get big rains that tend to bring that in. Um, the From pink bud, if you see any pink on a peach or nectarine flower at all, you start your fungicide treatments, especially for brown rot. Brown rot can go from 0 to full blown in 15 minutes if you've got free moisture and 68-degree temperatures. So,
Yeah.
lessons learned.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Let's see. And then I guess, from a big picture perspective, looking back, what would you want new peach growers to know before they get started? Like, is there any tips or advice that you kind of wish you had known might have saved you a little time?
Uh, Over the years, if you have any UCANR Extension Service seminars, tree fruit, stone fruit, try to attend them or at least get their notes from it. Because if you learn one thing out of 8 hours, sometimes it'll last you a lifetime of either heartache or success. I mean, if you don't go, you're really missing out. Over the years, if we didn't have our UC system here, I don't think I'd be near as successful. Well, I wouldn't have survived. I wouldn't say successful. Farming's like survival. But the grants from CDFA, we've received sweep grants, healthy soils programs for planting cover crop and compost. Building up your soil organic matter is tremendously powerful for moisture retention and keeping the water where you need it in the root system and not flushing all your uh, good stuff into the water table.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for saying all of that about the UC system. And yeah, I'm really, really glad to hear it. That's been so helpful over the years. And yeah, actually, I'm glad you also mentioned those, the SWEET program and Healthy Soils. And I can actually send links to those as well in the follow-up email for folks, for anyone who doesn't know about it and might be interested.
Right.
That would be nice for people to know about. Um,
Oh,
okay. And yeah, organic matter. I'm so glad you mentioned that too. That's a huge area of interest of mine. And yeah, I think it really can't be understated how much that can do for your soil and the crop system. Um, and I see we have a couple questions for you in the chat. And the first one is, how can we get your fruit in SoCal, Steve?
well, they don't put my name on at Whole Foods or Kroger's or anything, but um, and I didn't write a book like David Masumoto did about Epitaph for a Peach. So, I, but you can certainly, if this has a low chill hour and it'll grow in LA, you might want to plant a Diamond Princess in your backyard and try that out.
Great suggestion. Um, Next question, what do you use for brown rot that is organic?
Organic, we have some products that um, I can't. We have to alternate, like generally put on 2 to 3 sprays during the bloom time. So I'll go between a product called Double Nickel and Botrastop, and there's it's like a hydrogen peroxide product, and I forget the name of it right offhand, but um, generally with fungicides, you want to alternate. You don't want to put the same one on every time for in every season. Otherwise, you could run the risk of resistance. And same way with weeds, same way with a lot of other things that we try to biologically control.
Thanks. Okay, next question is, do you tip when pruning stone fruit? And I'm actually not sure what that means. So if you could explain that for me and everyone what that is too, that would be great.
Pruning is probably the most important step, and it just depends on which variety of tree, what your rootstock is, and kind of trial and error until you get it dialed in. Our peach trees, we try to prune to some approximately um, 30 to 50 hangers per scaffold, and we have 4 to 5 scaffolds per tree. And we try the hangers, we call them hangers. The fruit wood are generally about 1 foot long, ideally, the kind of greenish twigs. And you can differentiate fruit buds by the fruit buds. If you look real close, have 3 little nubs on the bloom, and a leaf bud will only have 2, I think, or 1. So, and we generally thin to on the bottom of the tree, 1 fruit per hanger, and then 2 as you go to mid height. And then on the top, you want to leave the most amount of fruit, maybe closer together, because that's where all of the juice goes to the top of the tree and makes the best fruit on the top, and it sacrifices what the lower down the tree you go.
Next question is, do you have any insight to share about growing peach trees in containers or in yards with lower light?
Um, what was the first part of that question?
Do you have any insight to share about growing peach trees in containers or in yards with low light?
Containers, man, I, there's different people that talk about dwarfing rootstocks and putting them, different scions on them. I think that's a bunch of hooey. And I, I, I'm just so used to putting it in the dirt. As long as you've got good dirt in a deep, well-drained soil, that's the best thing, for them. Um, and Dave Wilson Nursery, which you'd seen their fruit chart earlier, they have an excellent website on if it's just like a home orchard, you don't necessarily have to prune them the same way we do commercially. And they got if you want to graft, you can take the same tree and put a peach, plum, and a nectarine all in the same tree. They'll teach you how to do that as well too. So um, that's part of the fun thing about having a backyard uh, farm.
Yeah, and I would add too, I feel like that's a good question for maybe your local master gardeners as well. Like, is this
Right.
possible? Probably not ideal. I think ideally it would be good to put them in the ground. You're just gonna get bigger trees and more fruit, and healthier trees probably in a lot of ways. Is it possible? Probably. It sounds like maybe it might be possible, but yeah, it seems like a good master gardener question. And everyone throughout the state has master gardeners in your local extension office. So definitely reach out to them as well with honestly a lot of these questions if you're a backyard grower. Um, Next question, can you send the name of those products to fight brown rot? Thank you. So if you want to, if you're able, feel free to type it in there in the chat.
Okay.
And then
Uh,
I think we'll take one more question after that.
Okay.
And again, the UCIPM website does have a lot of different active
Yeah.
ingredient information out there. And there's lots of different types of products available. And you can also ask your local, if you're commercial, ask your local farm advisor um, as
Right.
well for different options out there. And if you're more of a landscape side of things, you can also ask local landscape companies and consultants and
Mhm.
folks, PCAs, folks like that as well. Okay, so maybe a last question just for the sake of time. So get a Diamond Princess Peach Pit from Whole Foods and grow it on your own, dot, dot, dot. Would like to taste one. Okay, that's a bummer. They don't mention. Okay, yeah. Okay, thanks. I guess that's more of a comment. I thought it was a question. Okay, last question for real this time is what is your orchard spacing and tree size?
My orchard spacing on the peaches are, I think it's close to 18 by 18, and we do it in a stagger plant. The rows are east-west, and they're not lined up north and south. They're stagger planted one row, so the sun from the south can expose trees more equally.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think with that, we'll go ahead and transition to talking with David a little bit. And Steve, if you want to stick around, please do, because I think it would be fun. I think maybe David might have a question or two for you. I talked to them the other day and we were like, ooh, we should ask Steve that. So anyway, please don't leave unless, if you have to be somewhere, I understand. But yeah, let's go ahead and welcome David Ulmer. So he's local here in Sebastopol, and I'll go ahead and see if I can switch the view. Hi, David. Hello. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you fine. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to ask you some sort of similar questions. So just to kick it off, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your orchard, where you're growing peaches and other crops, and what scale and that kind of stuff.
Well, I started my fruit growing journey back in Mississippi about 50 years ago. So I've been doing it a long time too, Steve. Okay. And so we moved to Sebastopol about 25, 26 years ago, maybe. And I started planting a little orchard here. I have 1 acre of beautiful sandy loam soil. And so I've been a kind of a variety collector through my career of all sorts of fruits, not just stone fruits, but apples, pears, peaches, plums, everything. And so the last good many years, I've been concentrating on trying to grow varieties of fruit that taste good and that grow well for me in Sebastopol, and trying to get rid of those that don't do those things. They don't taste good or they don't grow well. I still have way too many trees on my property. It's kind of a jungle. My spacing could be 4 trees in one hole, or it could be 6 feet apart or 8 feet apart, because I don't have to have a tractor going through there to cultivate my land. I do it all by hand. I do a lot of mulching. All of my peaches are mulched with rice straw, and that's been for the last several years. I just add rice straw every year, and it keeps down the weeds. It retains the moisture, and it adds organic matter as it decomposes. I use some minor fertilization of nitrogen primarily on my peaches. That's the main thing that I have found that I need to supplement most of the time. Sometimes I'll find that I need to use some other things. What else?
Who ends up eating your fruit? I know you're a hobbyist. Do you sell at all, or is it all for yourself and your family and neighbors, or donations?
I do not sell my fruit. It's given away to neighbors, friends, and I take it to the food bank. And what I've tried to do is to grow things with a sequence of time so that I have early, mid-season, late of each thing that I'm trying to grow, so that I try not to have too much of any one thing at any given time. Now, I do have a few trees that have too many fruit that we freeze and dry and do all those things too. And my wife Jenna makes wonderful jams, and I make a couple of things that I like too, jams and jellies. So, but we don't sell anything. When I lived in Mississippi, I did go to the farmers market for my produce there, but not here.
Cool. And can you tell us more about that sequence you mentioned? So, you said, you're growing a lot of different types of varieties, and so there's often something ripe. So how do you kind of choose your scions and rootstocks?
Well, I look in do my research and find out what's going to be ripening at a given time. If you saw the um, the early chart from Dave Wilson, it has a tremendous range of things, and you can look on any nursery, big nursery will have their range of ripening dates of various fruits. So you often have a chart just like Dave Wilson does. So you find out, you read about what you want to get and what kind of fruit you want, and just kind of figure it out. And of course, you talk to your friends. You talk to these people that you've met that are growing a lot of different varieties, and they say, "Hey, that's a really good one. You need to try that one." And of course, I do. And so that's the main way. Yeah.
Yeah, and what are some of your favorite scions and rootstocks that you use for peaches?
Okay. What varieties do I like? One variety that I would like to suggest for the home grower is Avalon Pride. It is a very, very peach leaf curl resistant variety that tastes good and ripens early. So it ripens around the first week or so of July, and it's a yellow peach, freestone, relatively freestone, and it tastes good. And what else can you want really for an early peach leaf curl resistance? The other peach leaf curl resistant peaches that I've grown or have tasted have not tasted that good to me. So this is the one that I've liked the most. Um, there are several, many different varieties now. Steve likes the Alberta series of peaches. For me, Alberta doesn't seem to ripen well in this area because we don't have enough heat. Steve, in Sebastopol, we're not getting as much heat as you're getting in the valley. So I don't go with the Alberta type very much. But most everything, even Red Haven, which is an old standard early mid-season peach, it does really well for me. But that's probably too high chill for many people in the area also. There's one crazy variety that I like. I mentioned to you, Ellie, is Flaming Fury PF Lucky 13. Now, PF means Paul Friday. Paul Friday was a breeder back in the Midwest that has released many, 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 many varieties through the years. And the California Foundation Plant Services has several of his varieties in their collection of varieties that you can get from them. So that's kind of a funny one. But there are a lot of really good ones. Another one that I have really liked the last recently is July Flame, which is a virtual nursery release. It ripens in August for me, but it's really good. And then I have a couple of my seedling peaches that I love. One called Ulmer Compost. Everybody laughs when I call it Ulmer Compost, but it came up in my compost pile. And it is one taste test. A lot of people like it, but it's extremely curl sensitive, so I don't recommend it for anybody who's not going to try to control that. So anyway, that's in general. But I have a lot, even later peaches that I like a lot. O. Henry is a great one. Is also very curl sensitive.
Thanks. And then do you have your favorite rootstock or favorite couple of rootstocks that you use for those?
Okay. Probably a lot of people don't know that the West Sonoma County had a very viable and big stone fruit industry back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They grew peaches and cherries a lot here. In about 1910, I think what was called peach blight came in and pretty well wiped out the stone fruit industry in this part of the state. We have a lot of bacterial canker here because of the wet, cold winters. and it's primarily in West Sonoma County. Really bad. So because of that, my favorite rootstock is Lovell. Lovell is the most resistant that I know of the commonly available rootstocks to bacterial canker. Nemagard, grows beautifully, but I've lost several trees on it. I have a good many trees on Nemagard, but it's not my favorite because of the bacterial canker sensitivity. Mireles the same way.
Okay, and kind of on that note, what have been some of the biggest challenges for you in terms of growing peaches? Maybe it's a pest or a couple pests or something else, and what's been the most helpful with that?
Well, I have several diseases and several critters that are problems. Okay, the diseases, Steve mentioned brown rot, is one that you really got to control. And the way I control it is orchard sanitation primarily. I try to put on a fungicide of some sort during the bloom period. And then if I get around to it and I'm not too busy, I try to do one late in the ripening period also. But I'm doing all this myself, and I'm not as young as I used to be, so I don't spray as often as I probably should. The other thing, peach leaf curl, I do control peach leaf curl. Uh, for most homeowners, probably a copper product would be the best one. Personally, I use lime sulfur. It's not easy to get, and it smells bad, but as long as you're careful, it's very safe, and it works beautifully for me. But it's hard for a homeowner to obtain that one. Let's see, what else do I have? I mentioned brown bacterial canker. So for bacterial canker, I prune in late summer. I do not prune any in the wintertime at all. And I start pruning only very late in the dormant season, in the really delayed dormant season, usually around bud swell is when I'll start doing my pruning. And often my peaches, I'm actually pruning when they're blooming. And it doesn't seem to bother my peaches very much. And I prune very, very heavily on my peaches. I take off probably 2/3 of my last year's growth. And of course, I try to prune out the center suckers and things that are coming up. Try to keep my peach trees particularly fairly small, because I'm getting too old to get on a ladder.
Yeah, and I would argue, I think small fruit tree size is great, no matter what age you are, really. And, I keeping your fruit trees manageable, small, that means everything else is easier, whether it's applications or harvest or pruning. Yeah, I'm just a big advocate for that in general. But
well, I have a couple of critters, that I try to manage. Oriental fruit moth is the one I worry about the most, and I don't really know what to do much about it. And peach twig borer is another one. I cut out the flag, when the borers hit, and Oriental fruit moth and peach twig borer also cause a little tip dieback. So I try to prune those out as much as I can. I try to put on a BT dipel type spray during late bloom or petal fall. I think that helps a lot. And then for thorps, if I said that right, the nectarines, the thrips on the nectarines can cause a lot of scarring and so forth. And I do spray spinosad at petal fall for that. And that is, I think, really, really important. Okay, I think that's, and I do monitor for Oriental fruit moth and peach twig borer. And I don't know whether my monitoring traps do any good to decrease the number of flying insects or not. But anyway, that's what I try to do.
Yeah, but at least the monitoring tells you who's out there, how much, and when, and that kind of thing. Hopefully, you get a little information from that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, well, my last question before I kind of open it up to everybody is what would you want new peach growers to know before they get started? And if you have any tips or advice that you wish you would know.
Well, you know, the first thing you want to do is think about your soil, because peaches don't like heavy waterlogged soil at all. And we do have plum rootstocks that some peaches are compatible with that work a little bit better on those soils. But really, you want to have a fairly good, well-drained soil before you start planting peaches. And if you don't, then you need to plant on a mound, and I'd say 12 to 14, 16-inch mound of dirt out, so your crown of your peach tree is up higher, and get some good surface drainage. And that seems to help a lot on heavier soils. So the soil is the first thing. Think about your varieties. Think about how much time you want to spend on these trees. Do you want to worry about peach leaf curl? If you don't want to worry about peach leaf curl, which I think you should, because I don't think a peach tree is very happy if it loses all its leaves and has to replace them. Isn't that right, Steve? Yeah, right.
That's right.
If that tree's got to replace its leaves every year, it's got to go down. It's over a period of time, it's just not going to be happy. So anyway, I think that's very important. So if you're not going to do that, make sure you have a peach leaf curl resistant variety like Avalon Pride or Frost or Muir or some others that might be more resistant to leaf curl. And think about what Steve said about multiple varieties on the same tree. I have 20 peach and nectarine trees, but I have 50 varieties. So I have several multi-grafted trees. So, I have a few trees that I want a big load of fruit, because I know that my Ulmer compost is going to be great, and my Ulmer shed clean is going to be great, and a couple others are going to be really good, and I want to have a whole tree. But a lot of them, and particularly new variety that I don't know anything about, I'll just put a limb on it and see if I like that variety. And then if I don't, I can regraft it, and that's fun. And I have that for my apples and pears and plums and pluots and everything. I just really enjoy doing that. So anyway, that's kind of my general thing for people. Think about soil, think about varieties, think about how much time you're going to spend on your trees. Are you going to take care of them?
Awesome. Thank you. And I know earlier you mentioned maybe wanting to say something about the rare fruit growers and your activities with them. Do you want to mention that real quick?
Yes. Okay. The California Rare Fruit Growers, CRFG, is a really good thing for you homeowners out there to think about. We have a really good group of people who get together and we answer questions from each other. We get together, we graft trees together, so forth. On February the 21st, I believe, that Saturday, let me look that up right quick.
Yeah, 21st.
21st, is that right? Yeah, the 21st, Saturday the 21st is our sign exchange, where we have rootstocks for sale. We do custom grafting. We have a person who does a wonderful pruning demonstration. I do a little introductory grafting class. And then we have cuttings or signs available for just almost everything. And this year we're cutting a lot of varieties from Andy Mariani's orchard in Morgan Hill. Andy is stone fruit grower there, does really beautiful work. And he has a great collection of different varieties. So we have cut, I think, over 180 varieties of fruit out of his signs out of his orchard this year, of all different things, not just stone fruit, but mainly stone fruit. And he's getting ready to sell that property. That's why we're doing so many this year. But anyway, those signs will be available at our sign exchange. So come see us. And you can join CRFG. crfg.org/join will get you there. And then after you do that, then you can sign up for our Redwood Empire chapter.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So it's almost 2:30, but I do want to ask actually Raymond and Steve this question as well. David, you and I had talked a little bit about, the most critical timing for sprays with peach leaf curl, and I saw that this was one of the questions in the chat. So while I still have everyone, can we talk a little bit about, ideal timing for copper sprays? How often? What's like if you're just going to choose one or two times, like when's the most critical time? So maybe Raymond, do you want to start us off with that and then go to Steve?
Yeah, I think Steve said this before, but prophylactic sprays and preventative sprays really just for all diseases is really important. So we want to look for the dormant time is the best time to spray it there. Maybe Steve can speak specifically to those timings, but prophylactic spray is probably what you want to aim for.
Thanks. Steve, is there anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, that's definitely true, especially for the copper and oil sprays during dormancy for a number of different pests, twig borer being another one. I mentioned the OFM control in our area. We place a pheromone strip on each tree on February 15th, and that has controlled our OFM to almost zero in our whole orchard. It's not cheap, but it's well worth it. I'm sorry, I must leave. I've got another appointment, but thank
No
you.
worries. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and so for folks who have to leave, no worries. Feel free to sign off. I'm going to stick around. And David, do you have another couple minutes so folks can ask you questions directly? David Ulmer, do you have another like 5-10 minutes maybe?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I'm retired.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'd love to go back to this question in the chat about rodents. So, I know we have tons of gophers here, and I'm sure we have rodent issues all over the state in peaches and other tree crops. But what are your biggest rodent issues? What do you do about it? What's worked?
What was that for?
Oh, what is your biggest rodent problem? Do you have gophers or ground squirrels or anything like that?
We do have gophers, but I found that gophers don't like peaches very much. They love certain pear rootstocks, but they don't seem to go for the peach rootstocks very much. One year we were growing some seedling peaches for sale the next year at our sign exchange, and we had a row of Clariana pears and a row of peach seedlings side by side in someone's place. They took out 70% of the pear rootstocks and did not touch the peach. Did not touch the peaches. I'm on a Zoom right now. Call me back.
Interesting. Okay, Raymond, do you guys have rodent issues down there at all?
Yeah, definitely gophers is a one that comes up first. Yeah, it's tough to manage them. If we're thinking about in terms of a backyard grower, maybe a little bit easier to manage them, maybe be able to flood them out or do something like that. Quite typically, what we see with some of the commercial growers, since they're still on flood irrigation, sometimes it's not so much of an issue for them, especially with the water being able to flood them out. Yeah, there's also that that tactic that I've heard before. I haven't experimented with it at all, but potentially using some bubble gum for some of the rodents as well. Maybe some of your squirrels out there. Not too sure if it works out or not, but potentially could help you control some of those.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
did plant in baskets, but like I say, I don't think it's as needed for peaches, but for pretty much everything else, I put them in baskets.
Mhm.
Yeah, there, and sorry if I sound like a broken record, everybody, but the UCIPM website has awesome, awesome resources on gopher management. That's the one I know the most about because that's the biggest issue here, but ground squirrels as well. Just lots of really good info, detailed info about trapping and monitoring and time of year to do things and stuff like that. So definitely use that website for those pests too. Um,
One thing that I would add as well, maybe not so much for peaches, but bird control also kind of comes into play as well. I know for cherries, it is an issue there. Just using some low cost flagging tape, reflective tape, kind of helps to keep the birds away as well. Sometimes use a little bit of netting if you have one tree in the backyard or something. If you're experiencing birds there.
okay, thanks. I'm gonna pick one more out real quick. David, can you talk more about thrips control?
About what?
Thrips and how you
Thrips?
control them? Mhm.
Well, the only thing I do is spray with spinosad at petal fall, and it seems to work. Before I did that, I couldn't grow a nectarine that would be edible, and when I started doing that, things got a lot better. Yeah. So, Raymond, you have any other ideas besides that?
No, I agree with that. Potentially, again, kind of getting back to the prophylactic spray, kind of getting ahead of the curve before the populations really start to increase. Especially using a broad spectrum, even organic pesticide there, we'll be able to help with those soft body insects that start to build up.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Let's see. I think we'll take one or two more questions. I see Joe asked anything besides netting. I'm guessing that was for birds, maybe? But Joe, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to clarify that.
Uh, we
Oh,
have
about squirrels.
about about cherries. Is that?
Oh no, I think we had a question about just different ways to exclude squirrels, but it sounds like David,
Oh,
that's not really a problem for you. Like you don't have, do you
no,
have ground squirrels at all? I don't think we have those really.
no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would say, Joe, go ahead and look at the UCIPM website for ground squirrels because it has so much there. Oh, thank you, Carol. Okay, so nice comments in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. I realized we went a little bit over, but yeah, thanks for being here and asking really great questions, and also just adding resources and comments and just helpful information in the chat too. It's very lively. And oh, before you go, I'm going to send this out also in the email, but if you could please just take 1 minute and fill out this very, very short evaluation survey for this webinar. So this is just a quick survey that tells me like, how did this go for you? Did you learn things? If so, what was useful? You can put comments in the little comment feedback area if you want to type out comments. If you want to see more webinars on other types of crops that we could be growing more here, in my opinion, probably should be growing more in this region. I've been doing a bunch of webinars on this. I've got another one coming up on citrus, avocados, apples. But yeah, please feel free to put any ideas or suggestions, comments in that section. So I promise it's very short survey. I'll send it out in the email too. But if you could just provide a little feedback, that'd be great. And yeah, thanks again, Raymond, for this awesome presentation. I learned a ton about peaches today. And yeah, thank you so much, David, for sharing all of your expertise. And of course, Steve, who's left. But yeah, it's just a really nice group. So thanks all for your time and expertise.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Bye bye.